I have watched over the last few years as first the Clinton administration, but then particularly the George W. Bush administration, fought internally to have any kind of a coherent policy on Iran. And I would argue that with a few small exceptions, they failed. That in fact the United States has not had a coherent policy. So from my perspective, with Obama clearly willing to entertain a different perspective, I don't think he's going to give away anything to Iran, but I do think he believes, as I do very strongly, that a policy of not talking to people who disagree with us is really short-sighted. Yeah. And assuming that he starts from that perspective also, then the question becomes not, should we talk to Iran, but how do you go about doing that? And that's a much more interesting question, actually, because then, you know, the Bush administration has been toying with the idea of talking to Iran, but they could never quite bring themselves to admit that that was what they wanted to do, and so they were sort of backing into it. Especially in this last 2 years, the Bush administration has changed its policies rather dramatically, and but you could never really engage them on the subject because it all had to be done almost covertly within their own administration, because they had so many people who were opposed to any kind of contact with Iran that it was regarded as almost heretical to do it. So Condoleezza Rice, for the last year or so, has been conducting a policy of gradually opening up to Iran and running into huge obstacles with the people who had been very much involved in making policy, the John Boltons and others who really objected vigorously to this policy. Well, that part of it will be over, I think. So then it'll be a question of, and I think the next debate is going to be, all right, we're going to talk to them, but what do we need to arm ourselves, basically, in order to talk to Iran? And a lot of people, liberals, conservatives alike, believe that the United States is operating from a position of weakness and that we have to beef up our leverage if we're going to be effective in talks with Iran. Frankly, I think we've got a lot of leverage. We've just never used it. We've never tried to use the leverage that we've got. But what this does, unfortunately, is that as people say, oh, well, we've got to arm ourselves for these talks and to make the Iranians take us seriously, what they really mean is much more stringent either sanctions against Iran, say a blockade or something like that, to get their attention with the threat of military action. And then if Iran doesn't respond the way we want them to up the pressure even more. It really is a recipe for going to war with Iran. And it's a covert strategy because the people who are proposing it say, oh, we want to have negotiations, but they want to have negotiations under our terms explicitly.
That to say, see, we tried.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they don't really believe that you can get any place with Iran. And for some reason, they seem to have a tremendous inferiority complex, that the Iranians are smarter than we are, they're more clever, we'll never be able to carry this off. And I simply disagree. I mean, I think we've got a lot of leverage, and I think we're pretty clever ourselves.